All right, everybody. It is February 24th, and if you haven't heard already, what we're dealing with is Russia invasion on Ukraine. Gordon and I are going to be talking about the best balancing points that we can find between the circulating narratives. There's definitely the left narratives, there's the right narratives, then there's the, is there something deeper, conspiracy narratives. So Gordon and I, our disclaimer is we are not, we are going to show you what we are finding in as many of the sources as we've found, and then have a discussion where we can speculate and we can also talk about, is this a bigger play? Is this just exactly what it is on the face of it? This is obviously something that has just been breaking over the past day or so and escalating now. So we really want to get into the points so we don't start seeing an escalating narrative on just one side and, in a sense, asking for blood and asking for retribution. We need to see where the potential for harmony is in this situation, and as always, embody it from within and come to this with how can we use the Aikido method of neutralizing as much harm as possible without ramping this up and inflaming the matters even more. So we'll get into the history, we'll get into the most recent events, and let's just get straight to it on the Ben Stewart Podcast. All right, here we are. We got Gordo and Ben on the Ben Stewart Podcast. As you can see, I'm not in my usual my shop where I have the Psychedelica poster behind me and everything. I'm out in Austin right now, and this story is breaking. And while there's just a bunch of other stuff in the world going on, obviously, it's very interesting that today we have this podcast coming up. We didn't have a guest, and this is the perfect time for Gordo and I to really hop into some current affairs and basically show you what we've done as far as the research on this, from what we've known about it from beforehand, and now what we could research today so we could break it down into some bullet points. So Gordo, I know you sent me some links. We have breaking points. I saw Kyle Kalinske, obviously Crystal and Cigar, speaking several different occasions about this. I've seen Alex Jones talking about this, quite a few other videos like Alexander Mercurius talking about just the whole lead up to this. And there was people saying it looks like back in December and I think December 8th, people were saying expect January or February invasion by Russia into Ukraine. So there's a lot of circulating stories, and we're going to hop right into it and try and basically within this hour boil it down to the main bullet points you need to know.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot. And so we're going to try to be really concise and give you guys sort of the main bullet headlines. And so kind of jumping right into it, everyone sort of woke up this morning, most people, to these headlines saying Russia, and this, first to start off with, there's a discrepancy out the gates between the two different narratives. Putin is saying this is a special military operation, and then the Western powers and most other people, a majority of it, I would say, of the other narrative is saying that this is clearly a large-scale invasion or a war. So right out the way, how this is being labeled is already interesting. And if you just look at it objectively, I mean, clearly, if it's a special military operation, they're saying it would be specifically, SWAT teams and specific, not as much army and militaristic. But this does look, and obviously this is from the New York Times, so everyone just bear with us with using the best sources we can find. And there are different sources for these things, but Times have been reasonable at giving updated, basically, a map of where a lot of the battles have been taking place. And as you can see, and this will be a critical talking point and understanding with all this, is the areas that are controlled by the separatists, the LPR and the DPR, People's Republic. We'll get into these regions, where those are and where the actual battles are taking place. So as you can see, the red marks are where all the battles are taking place. This is literally pretty much almost the entire border of all of Ukraine, in the ports along, especially in the west, which is not supposed to be as much of a hot conflict area. We've also seen a lot of battles. So I'm going to do a quick little video of Crystal and Cigar breaking this down this morning. They do a great job being sort of populist left and populist right, but we are sitting some discrepancies between independent online media as well with this, where certain YouTube outlets have a slightly different take on this. For instance, Jimmy Dore versus Crystal and Cigar and Kyle Kalinske. Now, I'll just let them start things off here for us.
It's a really solemn occasion here.
Yeah.
We're going to try and cover it from all angles about what's happening.
It's really a worst case scenario, all out assault on Ukraine. Land, air, sea, cyber, truly just a shock and awe effort from the Russians. And we are going to cover it from every angle. We're going to talk about what is happening this morning. Obviously, the news breaking very quickly, so we're bringing you the very latest that we can.
That's right.
Always with the knowledge that, especially in war reporting, things can change. Reports can be debunked later on. So doing our best to sort through all of that. We'll talk about what the expectation is from Biden and European leaders, how Republicans, including Trump, are reacting, what the markets are doing, how the public is likely to be impacted, and a little bit of a look back and a bigger picture about how we got to this place. The one part of the show that is not going to be about Ukraine is my monologue, because obviously it was written before all of this happened, but maybe it'll be nice to have some fare on a different note. But Sagar, let's start with the very latest that we know this morning.
Let's go with the latest. So last night, early morning, Ukraine time, around 5 in the morning, Russians began invading the country from all different areas, by air, by land, and by sea. There's heavy fighting all across the entire country. It is not limited to the eastern republics. Putin gave a speech saying that they're going to be conducting operations to clear Ukraine of Nazis. That's the justification that they're giving. The president put out a statement late last night speaking with President Zelensky. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. This is the immediate reaction there from the White House, that the prayers of the entire world are with the people of Ukraine. He calls the attack unprovoked and unjustified by Russian military forces. President Putin has put a premeditated war that will bring catastrophic loss of life life and human suffering. Russia alone is responsible for the death and destruction that this attack will bring. The United States, its allies and partners will respond in a united and a decisive way, and the world will hold Russia accountable, teasing there a massive sanctions package to be hit on the Russian economy, basically a full-scale decoupling there of the Russian banking system from our own banking system, previewed also by the European Union this morning. While they were reacting to this news basically in real time, the United Kingdom and the EU announcing a similar sanctions package. The G7 is going to be meeting sometime later today, including President Biden, with all of the different major leaders of the country. There was some late-night breaking stuff happening, almost a scene from a movie. The Ukrainian ambassador speaking at the United Nations Security Council, decrying a potential Russian invasion, handed a note, Crystal, informing him that his country was beginning to be invaded while he was speaking in New York. You almost can't make this stuff up. But at the top, I think we have to say a couple of things. I never expected a full-scale invasion like this to happen. I was deeply distrustful of U.S. military intelligence, and frankly, I think I got it wrong in terms of what happened here. I never expected Putin and Russia, in order to do something so, frankly, colossally foolish. He has fulfilled the dreams of the neocons now in Washington for all time. He is basically ensured now, Crystal, as we'll be discussing throughout the entire show, a full-scale NATO deployment to the eastern flank. This is the greatest thing that could have ever happened to the U.S. defense budget. I mean, there will now be a renewed justified calls. Already I'm seeing this morning the German former defense minister and others saying they're going to be re-upping their armaments. So we are looking at a whole new era of geopolitics here. And indeed. It is entirely...
So we're going to pause this throughout because just to comment on it and break it up a little. But as you can see, a key point that Cigar's making here is that whether you agree with Putin or not, this is clearly justifying a large amount of hawkish behavior for a lot of the Western world. So Putin, and we'll show you guys Putin's speech and give you his verbatim words from his mouth, why he feels this was justified. But regardless, that is an important component to this and how now they will be able to frame Russia and in general, these kind of Russia-China type countries in a new light that's more of a militaristic one. So this is kind of when people, and I'll jump back for a sec, this is why certain people, you and I were talking a little bit before this, we're not big into sensationalism, obviously, but we also can't be naive to certain times when there are enough variables and things saying, okay, this is getting a little bit heated to a point where it reckons. Certain people saying, are we heading towards a World War III? You know, Tim Pool's starting to say that now. Other channels have said that. And just quickly your thoughts on some of that. But obviously that's fucking terrifying. We don't want a third war.
So for me, and not saying in the chat is asking me if I'm in a bathroom. No, I'm not in a bathroom. I'm actually in a gym. There just happens to be a sink back here. But anyway, this is the best I could do while I'm in Austin doing these podcasts. And it's an interesting time to break this story. My thoughts on that is, as I was diving into this, the first thing I always do is I check out alternative conventional platforms, and then I check out all the not lower grade ones, but BitChute and as many others as I can find that will speak about the unpopular conspiratorial views. And Alex Jones was showing back December 8th when Putin basically was drawing his red line. He was basically saying, let me just make sure I get this correct because I wrote it down. Putin said on December 8th, either the U.S. and NATO provide us with legal guarantees that Ukraine will never join NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, or become a base for weapons that can threaten Russia, or we will go in and guarantee it ourselves. So this guy, Mercurius, let's see if I can find what he was talking about. There's this video that I found of this guy, Alexander Mercurius, talking about Ukrainian deployment of troops to the ceasefire line in early 2021. There's no Western coverage in the media speaking about Ukrainian deployment of many, many troops to the ceasefire line, which was basically a direct, indirect conflict with an agreement that they had in that treaty. And let's see, he also says, if Russia invades Ukraine, and this was back in December, Ukraine will be comprehensively defeated. Russia's military is far better than before, and China will have Russia's back, which now we're seeing China will still accept wheat imports and basically keep a little bit of their
And oil,
a little bit of Russia's economy alive. And this guy said, it will create a major crisis in Europe where neocons will demand actions from Germany and France because there was a brokered deal. This treaty of the ceasefire line was brokered by Germany, Ukraine, and France. And so really this is also, if you don't understand what NATO is, NATO, if I were to put it very crudely, was built up, and now it comprises of 28 European countries and 2 North American, obviously Canada and the United States, in order to protect other countries from Russia. So this goes back, way back, even into World War II, where half of Ukraine, was basically taking the side of the Nazis and the other half taking the side of Russia. So there's a deep history, 70, 80 years old, revolving around this area. And then you fast forward to Biden and Biden's family, Hunter Biden, and the 3 to 4 years that some colloquially say they were basically presiding over Ukraine, and made billions in this time period as well. And if you take the Alex Jones approach or some of the conspiracy theorist approach that Trump getting into office offset a very deep agenda to get Hillary into office, and under Hillary, COVID was meant to be released. If you get into that whole idea that it actually was released and it was part of a plan, a globalist plan, then what you might be seeing now, and I don't agree with this, but Trump comes out and basically pats Putin on the back for what's happening. It's really tricky, but that's just a few bullet points I wanted to touch upon. I'd love your thoughts on that, and I'll scan for a couple more parts of the story that I knew would really get under people's skin.
Well, I mean, I think the bigger dynamic, just things that, because there's things, as we said from the beginning, there's things that we're going to be obvious or we'll be open about if we're speculating, and things that are just objectively public knowledge that we have to just assess however we want to assess, but they're empirically real, like the wheat, for instance, like you just said, China's still accepting. So that what you can do is you can infer there clearly is a more friendly dynamic between them and what they've said, and then the implications they've made about Taiwan. That's in a very
give us that quote. Do you remember it? Because
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, if you want.
Basically, CCTV in China said that the fate of Ukraine is the future of Taiwan. Right. And when you see Russia and China kind of coming together as allies in this sense, even just with the wheat thing, that's going to protect Russia against a lot of the Western sanctions and keep some of their economy going. And yeah, I mean, when I'm talking about the Biden thing, not to derail what we were going on as far as China and Russia relations, but in the Biden thing, Biden has all the way back to when he was senator in the 1990s was, successfully persuading Bill Clinton to take action in the Balkans. There's something very interesting about this entire area that when nobody else under the Obama administration wanted to take on anything in Ukraine, that became Biden's pet project. And so these are all things you can read about. Why he did it and what the underlying agenda is always up for speculation. But
we know they have, it's just number one, very geopolitically important, just like Iraq, but also it's very important for the petroleum and the petrodollar, and understanding how the petrodollar affects where we invade, as well as central banking. So the bottom line is we'll get into this and we'll show it, but there has been this, objective encroachment by NATO countries more closer and closer to Russia. And so Putin, in his opinion, in his justification, he says this is his sort of way of drawing a line in the sand with the encroachment. Now that you could argue is false because he's attacking way more of Ukraine than these certain areas, and Cigar gets into that and saying that's why he doesn't believe that justification from Putin really anymore. So let's just continue to lay out some of the puzzle pieces for everyone, and then, use your discernment here. This is an ongoing thing. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of narratives. It's not like both sides, one's good, one's evil. They could both be kind of, shady and not good. And it's so just try not to look at this in black and white, I guess.
Keep saying perhaps. You know, don't come to some fixed conclusion in your mind. Keep saying perhaps as you're hearing all of this, because it's so deep that, people like Crystal and Cigar, who, they make this their life, speaking about these things, even with a lot of the people who are in the know the most, are still scratching their heads on some of these points. So let's hop back into it.
Yeah, because we're not getting all the facts from our intelligence community or from the Russian government or from the Ukrainian government. Maybe it's tough to know and even on the ground. But once again, use your discernment based on trying to find the best resources for these kind of things.
Putin's fault.
And China sort of tacitly aligning with Russia.
Yep, that's right.
Basically calling for, lessening of hostilities all around. So this very, wishy-washy, both sides kind of a statement, when clearly 100% the aggressor here is Putin and is Russia. The moment when I started to think, oh, this is about more than just NATO, and this could be what the intelligence community is telling us, is when he gave that long speech.
That's right.
And I know you're talking about that more
really
in the monologue.
The history of it.
Because there were pieces of it that were the sort of realist case of the Russian security interests, concerns about NATO expansion eastward, concerns about Ukraine, and even the possibility in the future of Ukraine being part of NATO. But a lot of the speech was a nationalist speech about a sort of return to Russian glory, Russian empire, Russian imperialism asserting itself on the global stage. And so when we saw that seemed to me like a real turning point and indication that there was a lot more going on here than just those sort of realist interests. And that's the only way I can wrap my head around what's been done here, is that nationalism is a hell of a drug, because there is no doubt, obviously, this is horrific for the people of Ukraine. People all around the world are going to suffer in certain ways, but the Russian people are going to suffer greatly as well. And we'll get more to, what the specific Western response is likely to be and how far they could go and what that would ultimately look like. But let's talk about some of the specifics of this invasion, because this went, as you said, far beyond just these eastern separatist territories. The original question was, okay, are they going to try to reclaim the entire Luhansk and Donetsk regions? Well, those battles are happening now. They're clearly trying to regain the entirety of those territories. But you have fighting and explosions happening all over the country, in an effort to take out airports in if not every major city, pretty darn close. And so we have a little bit of video just to give you a sense of what was happening last night as this was all occurring. This happened live on CNN, one of their reporters having to stop his reporting from Kyiv to put on his flak jacket as you hear explosions in the background. Let's take a look at that.
I think it's relatively safe at the moment. Look, I've got a... Oh,
there's another one.
I've got a flak jacket right here. Let me just get it on.
So Matthew Chance is live for us in Kyiv, Ukraine. Matthew, we're going to stick with you. Matthew is on a roof in central Kyiv, he's telling us, and just...
And this is a professional who's been in tough situations.
He's actually been very good from the very beginning.
Before, and you can see, how intense this is. And we have a map of where we have reports of fighting and shelling. This is from the New York Times, a map tracking the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And you can see there is not a region that is spared here. The one city that we don't actually have reports of shelling right now is Lviv, all the way in the eastern portion of the country. But you can see Kyiv, you can see Odessa, certainly those separatist regions with a lot of Russian speakers. So we have reports of sea invasions. We have reports of shelling from the air. We have reports of cyber attack. We have reports of, I've even seen image of, Russians parachuting in, also invasions, along with, there's reports that Belarus has contributed troops. They're denying it, but there's, credible reports that Belarus has helped them and has also supplied troops. And as of now, it does not look like the Ukrainian military is faring particularly well. Zelensky actually, not only has he introduced martial law, he's also said they are issuing firearms to everyone who is of fighting age, expecting these battles to come to town squares. You have that language?
Yeah, I can read it here from President Zelensky this morning. We will give weapons to anyone who wants to defend the country. Be ready to support Ukraine in the squares of our cities. Promising there, also last night, you will not see our backs, you will see our faces. So they're standing tall, well, as tall as they can. But we have to be honest here about the overwhelming power that Russia has brought to bear. I pulled a video I found this morning. This is from 15 miles just outside the ring road of the city of Kiev on a key strategic airport. For those who are just listening, bear with us. It's only about 10 seconds. But for those who are watching, this is a full-scale helicopter attack on this airport. Let's take a listen.
Вже штук 20 пролетіло. Не видно українського герба. Точно російські. Прямо над хатами. Прямо ось над хатами літають, падли. Полетіли в сторону аеропорта, бомблять аеропорт. Чути, що йде бій. Вже штук 30 нарахував точно.
And now, Crystal, we see that air bases have been hit across the country. There was even a dogfight. I mean, these are things that have not happened in the history of warfare since like the 1970s. It's unbelievable to see these scenes. And this is what it comes down to and why I never thought Putin would be as big of a fool in order to do something like this. He is now a pariah state in the eyes of the world. I mean, he has now committed something on par with the United States invasion of Iraq. I mean, there is no justification for this. You know, actually, can we throw that map up there on the screen yet again? Let's just emphasize this to all of the viewing public. The Russians claim that everything was about what was happening right over there in the east, for those who are just watching. Go ahead and show me how an attack all the way up near the Belarusian border, a pincer attack on the city of Kiev, attacks on the city of Mariupol, Odessa, by the port cities, has anything to do with any of that whatsoever. So look, you heard it here on the show, the most honest take you could possibly give about any of the Western role, and we'll talk more about this in terms of NATO expansion, legitimate Russian security interests, threats, but it is clear that this is not about NATO. This is about restoring the former glory of the Soviet Empire. And I have to say, Crystal, that this is one of the most catastrophic moves that Russia could have made in a long time. And the reason why, you may say, oh, it'll be successful. Maybe.
Let's hop in there, because there's, you know, so he's making a point that Kyle Kulinski makes as well. They both say, I don't believe that this is about NATO expansion. Kyle Kulinski was like, I think one of the smartest things to do would be to say, let's make an agreement and take that off the table that Ukraine will be used for NATO expansion at all, and see if the invasion keeps happening. And so I would love to know your thoughts on, like, what is Jimmy Dore saying that is conflicting with what Crystal and Cigar are saying?
So basically, and it's a lot of reporting from Max Blumenthal, who's a reporter for the Gray Zone and is an investigative journalist who's done a lot of great work with a lot of other stories in all over the place, but especially with Russiagate. So it's tricky, and it's basically, I'll play here quickly, but basically they're breaking down how this was more so of Ukraine's there is a, and we can show this, actually, let's just show this to have objective reality around this, because this is an important point. There is an objective Nazi element within Ukraine, neo-Nazi element, like full stop. And the debate, or I think the important question is, how much is it a part of the Ukrainian military / government, and how much is it really affecting their government and these military operations? A lot of the reports I think I saw recently were a lot of the current firefights are still these members of these certain groups that are neo-Nazi groups. But you'll see in this report, there's also a large percentage of Ukrainians who don't agree with these neo-Nazis, think they're crap and don't want them. And the president, I think has come out and said he obviously doesn't support them or like them. But these are just the different puzzle pieces. So this is just to give people the objective reality that Al Jazeera did recently, a piece about this specific group, one of these groups.
These men training on a football pitch in eastern Ukraine say they want to defend their country from Russian aggression. Freikorps has its origin in German nationalist groups of the 18th and 19th century, and the leaders of the group say it has thousands of members. But only 60 have bought their own licensed weapons and regularly serve alongside Ukrainian army soldiers on the 420-kilometre front line. 24-year-old Gleb studied Homeland Security and Crisis Management at university. He says one day he wants to open a gun shop.
Why did you choose Freikorps?
Because they're more ideologically closer to me. So I decided to join them.
When you say they are more ideologically closer to you, can you tell me what you mean by that? How? What do you believe in ideologically?
And clearly he starts to get very uncomfortable right here when he's asked that. Their logo literally has Nazi type paraphernalia on it with the SS type logo there.
Can we pause that? Okay.
Sure.
Freikorps is not the only armed group accused of being neo-Nazis that has appeared in Ukraine since the conflict with Russian-backed separatists started in 2014. Others, like these men with the powerful Azov battalion, have been incorporated into the Ukrainian security services under the Ministry of Interior.
So, like, they've been incorporated into the military services, and I mean, is the president just naive and unaware they have a strong affiliation to neo-Nazism ideology? Like, so I mean, that's just so that's reality.
Many groups like them have been praised by Ukrainians for their willingness to take up arms and defend the country against what they describe as Russian aggression. But that does not mean that they are popular amongst voters at the ballot box.
A coalition of right-wing groups only managed to win less than 3% of the vote in the last parliamentary elections in 2019. But some of its leaders, such as Dmytro Yarosh, have been made advisors to the head of the Ukrainian military. Participants in this torch-lit rally resembling Nazi gatherings in 1930s Germany hold a banner honouring Stefan Bandera, a Ukrainian Nazi collaborator widely recognised as organising the massacre of tens of thousands of ethnic Poles in Ukraine towards the end of World War II. Bandera.
So clearly they're celebrating a guy strongly clearly associated with, you know, the Nazi movement. So a lot of red flags clearly about these organizations already, you know, from this.
Is the nickname fellow Freikorps volunteers gave this man, 24-year-old Bogdan, says the group has its origin in what he calls pan-Slavism, connecting similar-minded people across Slavic regions of Eastern Europe, including Russia. But that changed when the conflict started.
If the West respects democracy and pluralism of views, they have to respect our views. But to get a political future, we would need to show people we can be competent leaders. We need to gather like-minded thinkers, qualified and educated people. If we manage that, we will have a political future and political strength.
Experts say the far right in Ukraine has its origins in football hooliganism, poverty, and a country that, along with many other post-Soviet states, has struggled with political corruption.
The Russian-Ukrainian border didn't really exist for these movements. The Russian far right and the Ukrainian far right moved in these same circles, and then when the war came, some of them chose one side and some of them chose the other. And the fact is that the connections are still very much there in some parts, and it's almost certain that there are Russian agents of some sort within these movements.
Freikorps leaders say they've been overwhelmed by people wanting to join since the crisis between Ukraine and Russia has escalated. But as
so
throw their weight behind Ukraine.
So
yeah.
That's another critical puzzle piece that, you know, certain people might overinflate than others. And then Jimmy Dore gets into this. He points out how I believe second in command, and I get specific, or a very high up position, is affiliated with one of these groups to the president. So as they showed in the video, they're a part of their military. They're in high positions of governance, and so we can't be naive to that. I mean, we can't just disregard that's not a reality. So that's just one of many pieces. And then the NATO encroachment, you know, basically Putin justifying in his speech, we'll get into, this is also kind of a war or an FU to globalism in a lot of ways, into this sort of World Economic Forum type ideology. He doesn't say specifically that, but you'll see the words, but it seems like this could be a bigger play against something bigger. And so it's interesting with China and Russia and their connection with Xi Jinping to Klaus Schwab. It's hard to know. And yeah. It
definitely feels like when you start seeing what was happening prior to this, just with COVID and, you know, even what's going on up in Canada, that these are, there's a story beneath the story. And like what was happening, you know, in Canada, and that's started to disperse as from what I saw.
Yeah.
That what's happening up there, we take a look at it on the surface, and there's these stories that most people get bogged down by, and you come to see that like there's this Emergencies Act that just basically got passed. And by most of the ministers, have deep connections with the World Economic Forum. It's hard not to see this as part of the whole Great Reset plan, which has within it, COVID has within it many other geopolitical maneuvers like chess maneuvers. And, you know, the interesting thing about that is, just a real quick tangent to the convoy. A lot of people were saying, well, that, you know, it's purely about is about the science of making sure that everybody gets vaccinated, and 90% of the workforce had already said yes. And it's like, to me, you at least have to call into question, is the real play, Like there's probably many real things that are part of this play, whatever this is setting up, but it's also probably about passing the Emergencies Act, you know, like, and there's, say what you will about like what side of it has, I think both sides of that thing up in Canada actually has some points. And I was seeing Jamie Wheel say, yeah, but you know, it seems like the people are rising up, except that there's this guy named James Bowder who funded this whole convoy. And I'm like, okay, who's James Bowder? And I could only find 5 articles that are repeating the same thing over and over again, that it's this conspiracy theorist who's truly into QAnon and he's funded this whole convoy up there. And I'm like, okay, can you show me one picture of the guy? Just one picture of the guy. And I haven't been able to find it. And it's just really curious to me, because if you dive deep, you can find plenty of pictures of George Soros. You can find plenty of like documentation of the UN, Obama, who authored a lot of what's currently happening in Ukraine, Council on Foreign Relations, Rockefellers, going into Ukraine and replacing the previous president with Zelensky, with the help of the Biden family, who, you know, Biden was, you could maybe call it the de facto president there for a little while stability was being sought. And none of this should be mind blowing. This is actually business as usual. But it is interesting to see that there are deeper plays happening here. You know, is it all about Nazis? It's probably partly about it, but is it all about NATO?
It's like us saying we went to Iraq for women's rights. Like, really? Okay, yeah. Dick Cheney, you went to Iraq for women's rights, you know? So they're going to give some moral, ethical reason to. But for me, the bigger thing is like looking past that sort of BS narrative they're going to give, and it's like Putin knows that this is going to justify extreme hawkish behavior versus them, so he's willing to bring that on himself. And so he's clearly made some backroom conversations
in line with the fourth term.
Well, I'm just saying, like, he's had to have conversations clearly with China and Xi Jinping, the CCP, of like, look, I'm about to make a big move. You got my back. Is India, you know, the BRIC countries, how many are they on board? This whole idea of creating a new central banking system, like, this seems like this could be a big step and a much larger step of plays by them to basically create their own system and go against this other global cartel of, you know, it's so, and I don't necessarily, both aren't looking too great to me, and the people are kind of caught up on all of this, like, what the F's going on, and like things don't add up, but you're saying this. And I was just like Cigar, I was really surprised when they actually did this. I didn't think I didn't see this coming.
I thought we were just going to hear about it for a while.
Right. And so clearly Putin feels emboldened in more than one way, and we can show his speech. We can show here with Jimmy Dore to get people let's give people just so they have another critical puzzle piece. This is his address, and we actually have a video Andreas has on his channel. That's a cool little video that we can just play just parts of some of the key parts of it.
Addressed by the President of the Russian Federation, citizens of Russia, friends, I consider it necessary today to speak again about the tragic events in Donbass and the key aspects of ensuring the security of Russia. I will begin with what I said in my address on February 21st, 2022. I spoke about our biggest concerns and worries, and about the fundamental threats which irresponsible Western politicians created for Russia consistently, rudely and unceremoniously from year to year. I am referring to the eastward expansion of NATO, which is moving its military infrastructure ever closer to the Russian border. It is a fact that over the past 30 years we have been patiently trying to come to an agreement with the leading NATO countries regarding the principles of equal and indivisible security in Europe. In response to our proposals, we invariably faced either cynical deception and lies or attempts at pressure and blackmail, while the North Atlantic Alliance continued to expand despite our protests and concerns. Its military machine is moving in, as I said, is approaching our very border. Why is this happening? Where did this insolent manner of talking down from the height of their exceptionalism, infallibility, and all permissiveness come from? What is the explanation for this contemptuous and disdainful attitude to our interests and absolutely legitimate demands? The answer is simple. Everything is clear and obvious. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union grew weaker and subsequently broke apart. That experience should serve as a good lesson for us, because it has shown us that the paralysis of power and will is the first step towards complete degradation and oblivion. We lost confidence for only one moment, but it was enough to disrupt the balance of forces in the world. As a result, the old treaties and agreements are no longer effective. Entreaties and requests do not help. Anything that does not suit the dominant state, the powers that be, is denounced as archaic, obsolete, and useless. At the same time, everything it regards as useful is presented as the ultimate truth and forced on others regardless of the cost, abusively and by any means available. Those who refuse to comply are subjected to strong armed tactics. What I am saying now does not concern only Russia, and Russia is not the only country that is worried about this. This has to do with the entire system of international relations, and sometimes even.
So that's a key little point he makes right there. And Putin, like any major world leader, you got to read every little word and look at it extremely importantly, because it's in the subtleties that you see the big things. And the entire system of international relations. This isn't just a war against Ukraine. This seems to be something bigger. And just, we've heard Xi Jinping make statements like that as well. So, just it is what it is.
U.S. allies, the collapse of the Soviet
Union
led to a division of the world, and the norms of international law that developed by that time, and the most important of them, the fundamental norms that were adopted following World War II and largely formalized its outcome, came in the way of those who declared themselves the winners of the Cold War. Of course, practice, international relations, and the rules regulating them had to take into account the changes that took place in the world and in the balance of forces. However, this should have been done professionally, smoothly, patiently, and with due regard and respect for the interests of all states and one's own responsibility. Instead, we saw a state of euphoria created by the feeling of absolute superiority, a kind of modern absolutism, coupled with the low cultural standards and arrogance of those who formulated and pushed their decisions that suited only themselves. The situation took a different turn. There are many examples of this. First, a bloody military operation was waged against Belgrade, without the UN Security Council's sanction, but with combat aircraft and missiles used in the heart of Europe. The bombing of peaceful cities and vital infrastructure went on for several weeks. I have to recall these facts, because some Western colleagues prefer to forget them, and when we mention the event, they prefer to avoid speaking about international law, instead emphasizing the circumstances which they interpret as they think necessary. Then came the turn of Iraq, Libya, and Syria, the illegal use of military power against Libya, and the distortion of all the UN Security Council decisions on Libya ruined the state, created a huge seed of international terrorism, and pushed the country towards a humanitarian catastrophe, into the vortex of a civil war, which has continued there for years. The tragedy, which was created for hundreds of thousands and even millions of people, not only.
So, like, look, a lot of these things I agree with, right? Like Gaddafi, how he approached it, modern day Libya, the slave state, it's fucking horrible.
Yeah, what happened in Benghazi was
right.
Benghazi,
Awful, these are fucking
primarily under Hillary.
Right. These are all valid, very true points. Now, the key is just like, do you use these points to justify your own horrible, fucked up actions, or like, are you trying to, create a better like we already see modern day Russia. There's some flaws with it for sure in my mind, but this is, this is part of the whole tricky thing is like, how do you separate, the good and the bad, and what is his true intent essentially, but I'm also just aware of like, I really understand, like, I'm not trying to, like, I think I have a pretty good understanding of also just like this, like the CIA and disinformation campaigns, like 80% is true, 20% is false. So I just don't know. He can be 80% true and agree with all this. I don't know if there's a hidden angle. That's the whole thing. And same with Xi Jinping or anything. And this is the same thing we see with our own leaders, right? But I do find it interesting that, look, the key thing I'm just looking at is like, I don't know exactly, and your camera's wigging out on me. I don't know exactly what the moves, no one really knows except certain power players, but we do know that he is clearly saying that this is something he's drawing a line in the sand and that he's ready. These are basically fighting words. I mean, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's been building for quite some time. You can tell. He's talking all the way back to World War II, and this is why I mentioned the fourth turning. We won't tangent on this, but there are predictable cycles not just within the market, but for international crisis, and this would be right on par, literally to within a year or two of the main escalation that was printed in a book in 1997, talking about what's to come, primarily in the West, in the Western world, primarily in the United States. But this honestly does touch upon some of what Catherine Austin Fitts was saying, money being siphoned out of the U.S. since the 1990s. Mm-hmm. A lot of this was planned basically a long time ago. Biden has had a hand in it. Hillary has had a big hand in it. I'm not so sure that, Trump was just some fucking cowboy that came in to try and save the day either. You look at, His daughter being on the World Economic Forum right next to Mark Benioff talking about reskilling for women, which is primarily a goal in my mind and Alison McDowell's mind, to proliferate more data from women who are not proliferating enough of it. And this is setting us up into a future where, of course, we don't want any war. And why are we hearing about this is a style of war that we haven't seen for 70, 80 years? It could also be part of the story to push the entire world to a point where we make a plea, like, what kind of freedom or liberty do we have to give up to ensure safety, which is the totalitarian tiptoe. And we can't not look at this. This is the thing. When there is, that we're not being told all the information. We can't, it's national security. So I was just talking with Bill Ottman last night, actually, and he was saying, how are you not supposed, how is a healthy mind not supposed to arrive at conspiracy theories, which is basically just, people colluding in secret? How are we not supposed to go there when there's no transparency whatsoever, and we're in the age of mis and dis and malinformation? So the bottom line behind this is, if you're just taking what the main left and right news programs are talking about, and you're not looking at how there may be a story underneath it, you're not a well-rounded researcher. I'm not saying I or Gordo knows the full scoop here, but it only happens by really asking deeper questions. And there's some fucking awesome people talking here in the chat. We have, it's lighting up. See if I can find New Architect said Greg Manarino says that Putin's actions bails out the central banks, which can now continue printing endless money and hyperinflate markets now that COVID pandemic is beginning to fade. So there are a lot of different theories of how this kind of ties in. And if you have some intuitions around it, put it in the chat here. I'll see if I can mention some of them. But this is kind of where we're at. This is just around 24 hours old.
I don't think this is really I don't think this is really fully just 100% about Ukraine. I think this is about something so much. This is about so many other things happening, other variables that have gotten to this was just a point. The pressure had reached a high enough amount, and Ukraine is not in NATO. Ukraine has tried to attempt to join NATO, but a lot of people said we don't want to have Ukraine under the NATO nuclear umbrella because of this exact reason. This exact reason type thing. If they got invaded, then we would have to possibly send in a serious, heavy retaliation or nuclear weapons. So Putin, and this is where Jimmy Dore will get into, is like the discussion of Russia about NATO and their encroachment, and like not wanting to just make a promise that Ukraine won't join NATO and will chill out, and then these talks being strange and certain people kind of playing phone tag, and the U.S. is down and then Russia, they're not down, and so I'll show you both sides, but that's a big part of this. But I do think the key thing that we're kind of hitting on is to look deeper on the surface here of geopolitically what this means, the implications financially, geopolitically, with security, with the shift in rhetoric in our own country, with domestic terrorism, with what's happening with other moves, with, like you said, with Trudeau and these young global leaders we'll talk about, and this great reset World Economic Forum ideology. This, I don't know. I do, like, my intuition, and we'll jump back to the video, is that I think Putin, I don't know. I'm not going to speak to it, but it seems to me like Putin's kind of like Trump. I don't think like he's the most got the best plan or the most ethical guy, but I don't think he seems as much part of the big club. And I'm not saying he's totally like benevolent or a good guy necessarily, but it's just, he's an X factor, kind of like Trump. So I don't know. He doesn't seem very controllable is, I guess, the key thing. I'm just trying to be as neutral as possible here.
For sure. Let's hear what, who are you going to, Jimmy Dore?
Yeah. So
yeah,
Putin,
he has to say.
He has some more, but basically, I'm going to play just a little more, then I'll jump to Jimmy, because there's one little point more he makes in this to wrap it up.
In Libya, but in the whole region.
So he goes and talks about Libya.
Of events is, of course, the invasion of Iraq without any leak.
Talks about Iraq.
Damage, destruction.
He's just basically putting our own faults in our face. Like, yeah, you're totally right. We did all these things.
Morality, but also imitated its behavior. It's actively supporting.
And all these are in the links for everyone as well in the description to watch and see the full things.
attitudes that are directly leading to degradation and degeneration.
He talks about the Western culture coming and degrading Russian culture.
Threats we have been hearing, just as our ability to counter this brash and never-ending blackmail. Let me reiterate that we have no illusions in this regard and are extremely realistic in our assessments. As for military affairs, even after the dissolution of the USSR and losing a considerable...
So he just gets into some more about the history. So jumping to Jimmy, this is an important little breakdown just for a map quickly to show people.
So on Monday, Russia's President Vladimir Putin officially recognized 2 breakaway areas in eastern Ukraine. Both of them are in the Donbass region. They call themselves the People's Republics of Luhansk and Donetsk, and they've been controlled by pro-Russian separatists since 2014, with Russia's backing. Now, these so-called People's Republics make up around 1/3 of the Ukrainian districts of Luhansk and Donetsk, and there's what's called a line of control, with the separatists on one side and the Ukrainian forces on the other. They've been fighting each other off and on across that line for years, even though there's supposed to be a ceasefire.
So they've been fighting across here. So this is where the separatists are, and this is where the Ukraine forces are. And they've been fighting since 2014, right, Max? Would you say since 2014, since there's a thing called the Minsk Accords, and they've never been following them. But that's, would you say that's how long they've been fighting, or have they been fighting longer, Max?
So they just basically break down the Minsk Accords.
Explain all this in a second, but it's just to give you a thumbnail, then we'll go into it. So, and they've been fighting over here since 2015. They've been shelling.
These so-called People's Republics also includes their claim to that extra territory. Now, President Putin made another big move. He's ordered Russian soldiers to go into the separatist areas. He says they're peacekeepers.
We've been speaking to...
So...
All right, so he gives some of his opinion. Another key thing they break down here is just understanding the context of the culture of Ukraine itself. I think a lot of, myself included, Westerners just don't really know too much about Ukraine and its culture. So this is a little map kind of helping do its best to sort of give a general understanding of the culture of Ukraine.
Look at Russia with suspicion, and then the East over here, they're closer to Russia. They're native Russian. They speak Russian, and they look at Russia through the lens of a shared history.
So in the East, you've got the Donbass region.
East over here, they're
and on the West, you've got European, where Ukrainian look at Russian with suspicion, and then East. You guys get the
Russia.
idea.
They're native.
All right.
Yeah.
Moving forward. Just trying to see another critical little piece. He talks about Trudeau and how a lot of leaders are really just, this is pretty bipartisan, that, you know, Putin is just the worst thing in the world, and, you know, this is horrible. So I'm not disagreeing or anything. I'm saying that this is pretty bipartisan, that everyone's just like, this is just 100% bad.
To be elections held
Putin
in rebel-held areas, but none of that happened.
So this was the Minsk agreements.
Shelling.
I'll just mute for a second. But basically, these are the agreements they were supposed to make to allow for ceasefire, with withdrawal of military, these kind of things. But these don't happen.
It was Ukraine government, meaning, you know, the proxy of the United States and Europe, that were breaking the agreement. Correct, Max?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was the Ukrainian government that broke the agreement, shelling the Donetsk and Luhansk republics, prompting them to form their own self-defense militias. And if you actually look at UN statistics on deaths, casualties, the lion's share is on the side of those in the Russian-speaking republics.
So that's this right here, what he's talking about. So that's the key thing to understand with context in this area, that these certain regions that we just showed on the map, the Ukrainian government, 81% of the civilian casualties were in the Donbass region. Those two regions is overall called the Donbass region, and only 16% were in the Ukrainian-controlled government. So basically, they were completely, you know, overwhelmingly had more, you know, casualties and offensive weaponry versus small area within Ukraine. They're going to touch on this
came
here.
in rebel-held territory. 16.3% were in Ukrainian government-controlled territory. So the point he's making is the same one you are, is that the people who are being killed here are Ukrainians in the rebel-held area. So it's not it's the Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the Donbass. It's not the people in the government-held territory. So this is considered, like kind of a slaughter in a sense, right? And so, in fact, forces in the Donbass, the vast majority of rebel forces consist of locals.
So this is the other key point. Russia came in, trained these locals who speak Russian how to basically, train them, in fighting. And then they mainly left. They stayed for two big conflicts they talk about. But for the most part, these are local Ukrainians who side towards Russia, who live in these Donbass regions, who have been trained by Russians, who are fighting. So you see how it's confusing, and the media wants to paint these people as part of Ukraine when it fits their narrative, and then not part of Ukraine when it doesn't fit their narrative.
So, in fact, here they this is in Foreign Policy magazine. Crucially, however, Ukraine has mainly not been fighting Russia's armed forces in the Donbass. Yes, Russia has armed, trained, and led the separatist forces, but even by Kyiv's own estimates, the vast majority of rebel forces consist of locals, not soldiers of the regular Russian military. Indeed, the Russian armed forces engaged directly in the fighting only twice, in August, September 2014, and January, February 2015, with limited capabilities, although both episodes ended in crushing Ukrainian defeats.
So when Russia did get involved with their Russian military, it was major victories for Russia. Once again, 1 in 6 Ukrainians. This is another important graphic just to understand the cultural context of this country. 1 in 6 Ukrainians. Ukrainian is an ethnic Russian. 1 in 3 speak Russian as a native language. So in a way, it's almost like a Ukrainian. I mean, I'm not saying in a way, this is a Ukrainian civil war already ongoing and Russia just siding with this certain region. But Russia has also been more aggressive by attacking more than just these specific regions. They've also attacked larger parts of Ukraine, where people say, well, then why are you parting? And Putin's justification is to demilitarize them and get rid of the Nazis within those other parts, I guess, of the country, from my understanding so far.
Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to mention here is because it is pretty difficult to really pinpoint exactly where this is going to head, even though people have been calling it for quite some time now. And I mean, this would really escalate if something does happen in Taiwan. That's not just my thought, that's many people's thoughts here. Somebody in the chat said that there were reports, I don't know how recently, but of military planes over Taiwan. So that'd be something to look up. One of the things that I wanted to mention is, so I've been getting messages from people basically saying like, I live in this area and here's the way I see it. All of what Russia is attacking are military bases basically. And basically an alternative story of like where the casualties actually lie. And the thought is, as I'm seeing, because I posted out on Instagram, the airport, the international airport being bombed. And there was a few other shots that I had taken or that I had gotten from Instagram that I was posting out. But I basically just said, the one thing to look out for here is the same thing that's happened all around the world. Mainly like in the US during certain riots, when you look beneath the social commentary of it, there's always infrastructure that is leveled. And that infrastructure exists around very specific spots and cities, a lot of the times having to do with the central banks. And the potential plan is to basically, when you couldn't buy eminent domain or when you couldn't buy other means because there's litigation, red tape, a lot of process you need to go through, by demolishing certain areas, it basically puts it into a different bracket where you can potentially buy up some of this infrastructure, rebuild it as a smart grid. I'm not putting my stamp of approval on that theory as for what's going on in Ukraine right now, but it is something that if you are looking at the underlying narratives that primarily people who are like conspiracy theorists who are talking about globalism and this all being primarily just a few small elite factions really groping for the last bastions of control, then you may want to take a look at this idea of how you raise cities, raise them to the ground basically, and then re-raise them as smart grid in the same way that China has over 120, maybe 130 smart cities by now. And that concept is going in many different places, regardless of where you think they fall on the geopolitical scale. So it's just something I wanted to throw in there as we're kind of like arriving at our big points here.
Right. And I think the nuance too that's important also, it just when you speak about where he's attacking with these naval ports, these airports, and these specific military installations, I mean, that's his way of demilitarizing Ukraine, right? Is I'm attacking these specific strategic military points as a way to sort of demilitarize them, you know, take away their ability to use those critical points. And for what reason and all that, we don't know exactly. But I'm sure, you know, there's a lot of ways they can milk this. But Kim, getting to your point here, and as we get now towards the future and more towards like looking forward, this, as Putin pointed out, this, and we don't know for sure, this is now more, you know, there's certain things we know for sure and certain things that are speculation, but oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the guest who was just on Rogan. She'll show here. He brought up and really the former extremist, yeah. I'm blanking on his name, Nawaz.
Starts with an M.
Yeah, but basically, this idea of is there a larger sort of power battle at play here, and clearly, we don't know 100% with Putin, but this could be a big play in that move. And so kind of touching into that and this larger kind of conversation in general that's become large and on the radar again with this recent podcast with Rogan, I do think there is some relevance to how it will tie in. So just quickly, this is the breakdown.
A conspiracy theory that isn't a conspiracy theory, but an actual agenda to reshape how the world economy runs. You will own nothing. The elites will own and run it all. But don't worry, you'll be happy. The idea seems to be to move towards a technocratic corporatism where every aspect of our lives is monitored and controlled by others. Now, Klaus Schwab, the founder of the WEF, is particularly upfront and even proud of his Great Reset agenda. He's built websites and even wrote a book. Another thing he's particularly proud of is his ability to shape and influence world politics through the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders program. Now, you might have caught some wind of this organization on a recent episode of Joe Rogan's podcast with his guest, Majid Nawaz. Let's watch this clip.
They call it on their own website, they call it the Great Reset. That's what they say themselves.
Yeah, that's a bizarre thing to do, to openly. Why do you think they openly discuss it that way? And openly, because the Great Reset has always been this gigantic conspiracy theory among the online folks. Like, this is all part of the Great Reset. Well, when he wrote a book called The Great Reset, you're like, hey man, shouldn't you be hiding this?
And in 2017 at Harvard, he's saying, you know, we're going to basically, all of these world leaders will penetrate their cabinets with our young global leaders. He's open. He's open. Blair's open. During the Iraq War, Blair tried to bring in ID cards in Britain. He failed. Now he's back, and he's trying to bring in digital ID during COVID, right? So they're open about it.
So this is going to be this never-ending process to slowly move the goalposts
towards more and more authoritarianism. Checkpoint society. It's all there. They told us this.
People have to realize this, right? This is important.
Yeah.
Now, Majid references.
So we'll get a little bit more into her, but Rogan really has a moment there, and she gets into how Putin was actually a young global leader. Dan Crenshaw, Pete Buttigieg, Tulsi Gabbard, a lot of names. Some I was surprised with, but like, it doesn't necessarily inherently mean, you know, you completely agree with the agenda. But Putin, as when he was maybe younger and being a part of it, he's probably somewhat aware of what they think within these circles. So that's kind of more of what I took away from it. But once again, Xi Jinping is a major player in these circles. This is sort of the deeper thing of is Putin a rogue X factor within this larger coalition? Is there a separation and divide amongst them occurring? I think we're seeing more
the separation a part of the story.
Right. We're just seeing the indirect effects or just the smoke and mirrors. But clearly we know, you know, when you look at the mainstream media, we know what they want. They want war and escalation. And Putin, that's why I'm surprised, really is giving them on a platter to justify it. I'm just trying to understand, why would he knows they want that. So why is he so okay? And is this part of a larger play with China? You know, if they make a move on Taiwan, then I'm really like, oh shit, this could be much, I don't know.
Yeah. Alexander Mercurius, I keep bringing it back to him. He did this BitChute thing that I sent to you in that article or in that write-up, Gordo. But anyway, he was basically saying that he was calling this back in December, that it's basically there would not be much of a chance of Ukraine coming through this on the, at least the forward-facing PR side of it, on the winning side of it. They would be obliterated and smashed, and this would create a lot of problems in Europe, especially for the neocons, and that would be felt all the way into the United States. If I think, let me just see, because I put in some notes as far as like when, basically go to 6:15 in that video, if you can.
Sorry,
hope it works.
It should. This is just
buffering.
The difference between BitChute and YouTube. Still, there's a little bit of processing.
BitChute.
I'm not trying to put them on blast. I've noticed this.
At this very moment.
Absolutely. I mean, if there is a war in Ukraine, then Ukraine will be defeated. That I am, as certain as one can ever be of anything. I mean, I mean, if Russia intervenes, there is no possibility of Ukraine not being defeated. I mean, the Russian army is a far more powerful force than it was in 2014, 2015, when it, when the previous Ukraine war took place. And of course, Russia has learned to cope with sanctions and is now sanctioned hardened. It's also got China at its back in a way that it wasn't the case in 2014-15. So there is a war in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine will be comprehensively defeated. It will be smashed. The Ukrainian military will be smashed. It's quite likely that will trigger an even deeper political crisis in Ukraine itself. It would probably cause the Ukrainian economy to collapse, what is left of the Ukrainian economy to collapse. It would also, of course, create a major crisis in Europe, with the neocons demanding action from Germany and France at a time when the Germans and the French are doing everything they possibly can to stop, not to take it. They're negotiating with the Russians to get Sputnik V. The Germans want to see Nord Stream 2 done. They're worried, in Macron's case, that Russia is becoming altogether too close to China. There are multiple concerns. And I think that the Germans and the French are almost certainly doing...
Yeah, it's so.
And you heard him talk about Sputnik V. Part of this comes into the vaccine. I don't even believe that's huge on the docket as far as why this is happening. But you see that it does tie into COVID-19 and the purchasing of certain. I think it was Putin or maybe somebody within his cabinet that was asking someone in the European Union for an apology of the way they were bashing the Sputnik V vaccine or something like that. So, I mean, this, to me, every source that I went to was talking about how this has been escalating to this scale for quite some time. And the one thing I want to just mention here is this was in that article in the New York Times in November 10th.
What's the title?
Of 2019.
You send it.
I sent you. So if you scroll down a little bit further, it's that link, the New York Times one.
This one, right?
And basically, yeah. So it says in the article, it says when Russia invaded Ukraine in early 2014, Vice President Joe Biden pressed President Barack Obama to take decisive action and fast to take Moscow, pay in blood and money for its aggression. The president, a Biden aide, recalled, was having none of it. So Mr. Biden worked on Mr. Obama during their weekly private lunches, imploring him to increase lethal aid, backing a push to ship FGM-148 Javelin anti-tank missiles to Kiev. The president flatly rejected the idea and dispatched him to the region as an emissary, cautioning him about not overpromising to the Ukrainian government. And then just the very next thing I wanted to say is Mr. Biden's son, Hunter, joined the board of a Ukrainian gas company that was the subject of multiple corruption investigations, a position that paid him as much as $50,000 a month. And in the view of some administration officials, including the ambassador to Kiev, threatened to undermine Mr. Biden's agenda. And so the last thing I'll say is Biden wrote in his 2017 memoir that he viewed Ukraine as the front line in a larger battle to contain the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. This goes like very far back with Biden. So again, this
goes back to the Cold War.
Biden.
I mean,
you can't blame the whole thing on Biden.
Yeah,
this is bigger than him, but it definitely shows you that there has been this agenda moving forward. And I do wonder if this would have happened a lot sooner had Trump not gotten into office and Hillary would have gotten in.
Well, they wanted to create a no.
I think either of them are swell.
They wanted to create a no-fly zone over Syria, Hillary. Like they clearly with Russiagate, they've been trying to agitate and create this neo-McCarthyism. They clearly wanted to reinvent the boogeyman of Russia, just like in the Cold War, to justify, more neo-McCarthyism in a lot of ways. But that's why I'm just like, I don't understand why Putin would fall for the bait unless he's like, oh, I know, but like, I've got my own bigger play here. Like, because it's so obvious they wanted a war with him, and they were doing the Ukrainian president and all of our propaganda was like doing its best to like clearly try to create and antagonize a war with him. And then for him to just be like, all out do this is like, okay, wow, like he's not an idiot, so he knows these things, but I just don't know what his bigger play is here. And the only thing I can think of to give him enough audacity to do this is if China really is like, we got your back, because they couldn't do this without feeling safe. That's their only ally that's big enough to back them,
And so I want to mention two people in the chats. Browsy B says, I'm just confused here as in Canada, Trudeau supports and admires China. And he says, I believe China and Russia will stand as one, yet Trudeau just funded $500 million to Ukraine. And then scroll down and welcome to the shore said, China and Russia do not like each other. I hate when people say China and Russia will become one. My curiosity is like, what are we basing any of this off of? It's a really tricky situation.
Well, we know
Michael Petrakis in there.
I mean, I'm basing their based off the objective data that China is still accepting wheat from Russia, that Russia sells a massive amount of petroleum to China, that there's a large amount of economic and geopolitical reasons for them to be, whether, they don't have to like each other, but they can get along, and they have a very similar region of the world that they can push out from if you're looking at it from just, I hate to fucking say it, but like a World War III situation, like, but I don't think China would want to team up with Russia in this. I think this is something where China, but they clearly, I'm just like, they, like you said, with the wheat and stuff and with Taiwan and what they said, like, that's what they've said. We don't need to speculate.
They're either opportunists and like this guy is saying, like, they don't like one another, but they're just basically both trying to get theirs out of a similar situation.
They both might hate the West, right?
Yeah, and he says, like, when I said, like, what are we basing any of this on? Browsy B says, history, Ben. Like, history is not one thing. There's several different storylines pervading what you would call history, and some people just take one narrative as a given and throw the other ones out because of our biases, for the most part. So, like, it's not as simple as it may seem. It does inevitably seem to keep coming back to this globalist agenda, but maybe, that's where I always seem to side, but that could be my bias. And it could be that ignorance and ineptitude could parade as something intelligent behind the scenes. It could actually appear intelligent, and really maybe this is very reactive countries in a not so organized scheme to take over the world. It's really difficult because, like, in this situation specifically, I didn't see it actually escalating at this point. I thought something like this would happen if it were to come out that, Trudeau said something else that was offensive and they need to cover that story with a war. That's what I would have thought. And so the only thing I'm seeing here in the chats is people are saying, well, it seems like the COVID narrative is dying down, that
Right.
even the CDC and the WHO are saying, well, our lockdown measures didn't work like we thought it would. It didn't lower the death rate, yada, yada, whatever it is. This occurrence is coming right on the heels of 2/22/22, like this big event that a lot of people are saying, like, let's focus this global meditation, let's focus on harmony. And literally the very next day this happened. So I mean, I know we ran past the hour. I really appreciate, by the way, anyone that I might have pushed back against in this so Browsy B, let me just read what he said. What's the difference between a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy? 6 to 12 months. Okay, yeah, I heard that one. I like you. I turned the corner. With that being said, we're going to wrap this up here soon and go back to the research board, because there's something deeper. And I imagine with this crisis, there is the opportunity. If you look at the Chinese character for crisis, it both means danger and opportunity. I'm curious what the higher road, what the middle path, what the spiritual take on this could be. What is the opportunity here to bring lessons and potential harmony from this situation? And what does that have to look like? How do we embody harmony? Do we shut off all our technology? Do we shut off everything, sending us all these narratives, or do we stay connected but with the right center within? What are your final thoughts, Gordo?
I mean, I just think with specifically with this, with what's happening with this, and we'll say specifically this, they're going to do everything they can to ramp up war, not only in Ukraine, but maybe a larger conflict with larger countries. And you can have madness on both sides and be caught in the middle of madness. And it can be the majority that think this is madness, and it could be a very small few who are creating the madness. But I think we, as the citizens of the world and in each of our respective countries, we have to be very careful about how much we let ourselves succumb to the madness and the fear, and try to hold space and try to just say, look, I'm not necessarily disagreeing, but can we maybe look a little deeper, or can we try to not be as emotional about something that can be extremely easily to get really emotional about, to be very terrified of a new world war. And I understand that. I'm not saying we should be naive to these things, but we should do everything within our power, within our mind, body, and spirit, to help resolve this the best we can peacefully, and to avoid a third world, because a third war at this point could be a world ender easily, with the amount of nuclear weapons these powers have. And I saw, as a joke, and me being sort of the alien guy in the room here, on the Security channel, like, if there was ever a good time to maybe start having a little bit more like direct disclosure from our Star brothers and sisters, like, this might be the good time, because I just I'm not naive to like once again, I didn't think Putin was going to do this, and he did it. So things could change very drastically, very quickly. And I'm joking, kind of like we shouldn't wait on that being the solution. But if this needs mass protests, I don't know. It's tricky, because a lot of people are on board and think this is okay to justify a large. They're going to push for something larger against Russia and Ukraine. They've already said that. So
that's what it feels like.
It can get scary.
It feels like a chess
fast.
move.
Yeah.
It feels like a chess move that can escalate to checkmate real quick. There's one thing I want to say. Michael Petrakis, this is how it happened, how we achieve world peace. I love this guy, Michael Petrakis. I interviewed him for Waking Infinity. You can find that on Gaia. And he's just got a very coherent and very direct way that we can leverage things that we would call crisis, fear, leverage these things in a grassroots effort towards world peace. So Michael, I freaking love you. By the way, everyone listening, there's 102 people watching right now, and there's 52 likes. See what happens if y'all just give a like to it. And that doesn't mean you like the topic, well, hopefully you like the balance of the topic. But just go ahead and click it if you haven't already. Appreciate that. And damn, I want to wrap this up in a beautiful way. I think that there's always the opportunity for, there's this thing called the spiral dynamics ladder. Claire Graves maybe didn't come up with that specifically, but Ken Wilber took over Claire Graves' work and really brought it to the spiral dynamics ladder. And at the very base of it is tribalism. And then the second one is something akin to like left-right politics and nationalism. And the farther you get up that spiral dynamics loop, the higher you see global affairs from. So when you speak about it to people who are on lower rungs of the ladder, unless the lower rungs are inspired to elevate their perspective to see what's happening on a more nuanced level, then they take the arguments from the people that are higher on the ladder, they degrade the message down to something that they can fit inside their world concept. And with that, they just turn something different back into the same left-right fight. And I'm curious, I know there's a lot of people that must be slightly on the left or slightly on the right, and I would never say give that up. I would say discover what beauty can be brought from that and only leverage the beauty of the left-right paradigm. And everything else, if it has to do with calling people fucking idiots or making fun of the other side or talking trash on your fellow human beings, that is the surest way to make sure that we are falling right into the trap that I've been calling out in my films for quite some time, and Gordo and I have been talking about for quite some time. This is not a time for us to use inflammatory words. This is a time for us to ask relevant questions and refuse to give up asking those relevant questions, but doing it from a space of inner harmony. I don't know any other way I can bring some kind of balance and potentially spiritual perspective to this, as this is very, very new. So I guess your last thoughts there, Gordo, before we wrap it up.
No, I think that's well said. And this is going to be a test for a lot of people. It's already been a test for me and some of my dynamics within my own familia of just like people are going to be very emotional about this. Some people are going to be very angry and very easily defensive or quick to be opinionated. And this is going to be a test for a lot of people who are really trying to do the work to just say, you're entitled to that. I don't necessarily agree, but trying to just say, if you're open and when the setting's right, to maybe showing them some other pieces of the puzzle like we did here, to just try to get them fully more educated on all the pieces so that they're not being exploited in any way. And this will be challenging times for a lot of people. I mean, I'm myself included, this is wartime, man. It's, think about before 9/11, how much there's pressure to get into a new war and these kind of things. And so the war machine is in full gears right now. I'm not disregarding or apologizing for Putin and his actions being sort of the initiator slightly with this action. But as we said, there was context before this. And we do not want a major escalation between these powers, these first world powers.
No, we definitely don't. And, I'll just end it on this. Having done many different plant medicines in their original container, their indigenous container, what anyone guiding, facilitating, doing shaman work, there's a bunch of ways you can say it, but the thing is there's only one thing that can awaken a human, and that's that individual human's agency to say yes to an opportunity and embody a lesson. And there's nobody, not a shaman, not a plant, nothing can awaken you except for your ability to truly surrender to what is, to accept what is. Doesn't mean you have to agree with, but to accept that reality is the way that it is. And so a shaman may hear from somebody undergoing a really difficult healing crisis that, a bunch of stuff can be spit on that person. Like, you're a sadist, you're torturing me, you're of the devil, like any of these kinds of things can be spit from people who are deeply in fear and undergoing a healing crisis. So the number one thing that I would say is any of you who are committed to truth, beauty, and harmony, if you're committed to that, and you really know it in your heart that you may get caught up in some of the rabble rousing, but at the core of it, you're committed to that, then I would say the best thing we could do is acknowledge that there are going to be very angry people. There are going to be very scared people acting in very erratic ways that to us may not seem logical. Treat them as people going through a healing crisis on a plant medicine or something akin to that, and acknowledge that this is potentially what the healing looks like. Because before we can step into collective embodied harmony, we may need to see what a healing crisis en masse globally actually looks like. And it may not be pretty. So those of us who are committed to truth, beauty, and goodness and harmony, hold space for those that are not going through this portal gracefully. Hold space for them in a way where on the tail end of it, they haven't heard you make fun of them or make a mockery out of their healing crisis. Let's try and keep the inflammatory words to a minimum, keep the perspectives intelligent and nuanced, and try to remember to always come back to, we are brothers and sisters. We are not enemies. We're mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters of one another. And yes, there are some people who seem to embody the collective parasite that seems to have grasp of this world. There are some people who embody that to the nth degree. But at the end of the day, if we build the new world, the old model becomes obsolete. And those things seem to correct themselves in a more organic fashion than if a new regime comes in and stomps over the old one in the name of truth and justice. So that's my final thoughts on that. Thank you all so much. I think this is the most people that we've had in this chat room. I love that Michael Petrakis, Marlon Tudu, Browsy, Ikdu. I'm trying to come up with all these names. You're all fucking brilliant. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We do this every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern live. Keep coming back, and we will keep reading your comments. With that being said, keep up to date with what's happening in the world, but remember, your human potential clearly brings you far higher than your concepts can tell you who you are, who you truly are. And this crisis, don't let it make it feel like it's bigger than you. And if you're in the midst of this crisis, this is not a way of belittling what this is. This is obviously a real world situation. But this is the greatest opportunity for us to find how to love those that it's hardest to and how to support those that it's most difficult to in the times when it's needed most. With that being said, I love you all. I'll catch you next week on the Ben Stewart Podcast.